Story 1. Leadership never talks to staff to make decisions and keeps everything very secretive and close to the chest. Story 2. You have a new manager every 6 months. I am looking at you, Amazon, even though Amazon itself is one big red flag. Story 3. We have red flags that we attach to anything that extends beyond the back of the trucks. People still walk into objects all the time. Story 4. Unclear job descriptions. Suddenly, tasks are added to your responsibilities, but they were not included in the original job description. Also, filling in for someone who recently left may lead to the position not being filled again, leaving you stuck doing more than you can handle. Story 5. Anytime you have a supervisor tell you, "I am a straight shooter," or "I will never hesitate to tell it like it is," they will never accept responsibility for their own failure. What they really mean by this is, "I will blame everybody else quickly." Story 6. The increase of minimum wage applied, but not to those on higher wages. I worked in a place where the higher paid employees actually ended up on the same minimum hourly wage after it did not keep up with the wage increase for 3 years. Story 7. Constant employee turnover. Watch the help wanted ads online for your employer's name. I lived in a small town for decades where there was a local pizza place everyone always raved about, how the pizza was excellent. It was a local tradition to have pizza there for special occasions like high school or college graduation. Just one of those amazing local places. The problem was, it was only amazing for the customers, not the employees. The owner was an immigrant who came to the United States and started this business with his brother. When the brother died, the current owner kept it going. Unfortunately, out of the 2 brothers, the one who died was the kind one. The remaining brother was a complete jerk who would belittle, scream at, and throw things at his employees all day long. He never had a kind word for or about any of them, even when customers called him out on it. The help wanted ads in the newspaper were almost constant. He might as well have purchased permanent ad space in the help wanted column. He could not keep employees because he treated them so badly. What is amazing is that he was able to stay in business as long as he did. His treatment of employees apparently was not enough to hurt the business. He retired, and his nephew took over and was a far better employer than his uncle ever was. Story 8. Faux enthusiasm. If your management makes regular efforts to get everyone excited, it is usually an indicator that you work in a soul-sucking environment and your company survives only because your employees are too stubborn or underskilled to find work elsewhere. If it is not a negative environment, then there is no need to get everyone excited. Additionally, if you have daily meetings that exceed 5 minutes or weekly meetings that exceed 45 minutes, there is a good chance you are working in a negative environment. Story 9. For new starters, your manager schedules you for dozens of onboarding meetings with people you will never interact with again. I have found this implies they will be both disorganized and micromanagers, which is the worst combination. Story 10. When the boss used too many buzzwords unrelated to your job, such as artificial intelligence this and artificial intelligence that. Sir, we are a water bottles company. Story 11. When everyone says, "It's just like a family here." At first, it sounds warm and welcoming, but what they usually mean is blurred boundaries, guilt-tripping instead of honest feedback, and an unspoken rule that you are expected to sacrifice personal time because we are all in this together. Families are great, but you do not get performance reviews from your uncle or messages from your sister at 9 p.m. A healthy workplace acts like a team, not a sitcom. Story 12. Flexible working hours means you need to determine if it implies working around the clock and being expected to be accessible and responsive at all times. Story 13. When recruiting, hiring managers try to sell the culture because the pay is often below fair market value. Story 14. Employer reviews are evenly split, with positive reviews often being single sentences without context. Negative reviews provide detailed reasons. Story 15. Getting hired with no real vetting or interview process. I am not talking about the small family-owned store hiring a local child they have known since he was 3. Hiring warm bodies just to fill positions is not a good sign about the workplace culture. It means that either employees are considered highly expendable or that the organization is experiencing retention problems for other reasons. Story 16. My sister worked at a company where someone accidentally sent an email copying the entire staff with everyone's salaries and potential offers. Turned into a bit of a disaster. Story 17. Being hired on the spot if it was not a posted job fair. There should always be a waiting period to review other candidates unless the employer is desperate to hire. Story 18. Nepotism. I arrived at a new job only to discover that the chief executive officer placed his son and daughter in high-level roles for which they were absolutely not qualified. Story 19. Bosses who go to lunch or engage in after-hours activities with some, but not all, members of the team or department. Story 20. Gossip initially gives you the impression that you are being included in the group. However, as time goes on, you realize how insidious, mean, and destructive it can be. Story 21. Being told by the administrator that you are confrontational when all you did was complain about being shamed publicly by office staff on the workplace messaging app for something you did not do. Repeatedly. Story 22. You ask a question about their values in an interview, and they look at each other awkwardly. Then there is a long silence, and they say something that does not answer the question. When you follow up, they just repeat exactly the same thing, then end the interview with, "Okay, we feel we have enough information now." Another potential employee told me, "The purpose of business is to make money." In response to a question I asked about whether they celebrated their wins. Story 23. Being a minimum wage worker and being told to manage other staff who were earning more than me, I was thankfully able to get out of that. Story 24. One place I worked had a beeping smoke detector when I went in for my interview, so I mentioned it. On the first day I worked, it was still beeping, and I quickly felt that the whole business was poorly managed. I think I worked one more day before quitting, but the smoke detector was the first warning sign. Story 25. Executive leadership is unable to see beyond their own interests and areas of focus. These individuals tend to dig in and resist change in the overall strategic direction. Once there is a critical mass of this type of thinking at the executive level, it sets in motion a long, gradual decline of the business. Story 26. When people say, "We are like a family here," because families are great until Thanksgiving dinner turns into a drama showdown, it usually means drama, blurred boundaries, and zero work-life balance. Story 27. "You should apply. They are always hiring," is the same as, "Can my roommate move in? They got kicked out of another place." Story 28. When a company raises all their wages by several dollars per hour, such as when Walmart increased to $11 or when Target increased to $15, it is because they treat people poorly and everyone knows it. They raise the wage to attract a flood of new applicants, hire many new employees, and treat them very well for about 3 to 6 months, similar to love bombing by a new partner. Then the situation changes. They start cutting hours, demand more work from employees, and do not replace those who leave. Story 29. Sexual harassment from a coworker. Sexual harassment from a customer. Verbal bullying against most of your coworkers. Story 30. New hire identifying problems that require fixing, when in fact they are creating issues to resolve, and it turns out there was no actual problem. Story 31. When down in the warehouse, they have a little fellow driving the forklift. He cannot see over the top because he is wearing large platform shoes to reach the pedals due to his short legs. This is an immediate safety concern. Story 32. If the break room is unpleasant. The worst jobs I have had featured a table with a backless stool in a hallway, closet, or other extremely small space, squeezed against boxes or beside a loud machine under bright light, shared with another person. When they do not offer any perks and you have to pay for everything. I was shocked working in franchise food places. You cannot even have a snack like an old donut for free. Obviously, staff tried to sneak food, but that had raccoon-like vibes, hiding in corners, and it grossed me out. It makes me sad. Story 33. Many employees leave after receiving bonuses. New managers hire staff from their previous companies. New employees begin to become compliant without question. Story 34. Poor work planning and lack of standards. One factor that keeps employees engaged and focused is having a clear, practical work plan and deliverables, which should serve as the foundation for an annual review. People need to understand what is expected of them and how their performance will be evaluated. I have worked in places where the work plan is treated as a mere suggestion. For example, one year my work plan accounted for 120% of my time and excluded additional tasks I was expected to complete, such as blog posts. I was told this was acceptable because it was just a general guideline. As a result, the annual review became essentially an informal assessment, making work planning a meaningless exercise where it was unclear if I was succeeding. No notes. Story 35. Nepotism. You will never be as good as their own family when it comes down to it. I have worked with many people who had no business doing the work I do. They were only there because they were related to the owner. On the plus side, they are usually the first ones fired when there is a buyout or merger. Story 36. Places like mine, where it is almost impossible to get fired. Standards are so low that unless you steal from us, it is pretty much a job for life. Story 37. People who cannot be quiet. I will quit a job before I work with the nicest person who just cannot seem to be quiet. It means that there is more talk than action going on. It is a distracting environment, and no one is going to correct it. Goodbye. Story 38. There is a large employer in my town where you cannot get a job unless your grandfather worked there and you just buried him. It is a completely closed shop, and not because of labor unions. Story 39. Job application questions that violate the law include asking about your past salaries in certain states, your religion, your sexual orientation, whether you are married, or if you have children. Story 40. Also, if you lose out on 2 to 3 promotions, especially when you are perfectly qualified for the position, forget it. You are done there and you will never get promoted. At that point, it is time to leave. Story 41. The person who seeks you out and wants to give you the inside scoop is the office troublemaker. Story 42. While working at a very toxic workplace with over 200 people, we received a strange comment from the head boss. He said that in the parking lot, all those who parked by backing into the spaces were at-risk employees. Why? Because it showed they wanted nothing in the way when it was time to leave at the end of the day. After that meeting, many of us started parking head first. We did this even though it was dangerous at the end of the day with all the speeders in the parking lot trying to get home as soon as possible. Story 43. For me, 2 of the biggest warning signs are companies that are constantly hiring and companies that refuse to discuss wages, often using phrases like, "We're a family." Story 44. Look at the decision-makers' offices and then the workers' office. Workers use reams of printer paper to prop up broken monitors. Executives have standing desks and treadmills. One can conclude the company does not invest in its employees. Story 45. We are a family here means do not expect a pay rise, promotion, or bonus. Expect plenty of unpaid overtime and travel without fare or any compensation. Just know. Story 46. Confusing coworkers with friends. Just because you are cordial and friendly does not mean they care about you. If you would not see yourself inviting them to your house, maintain your social distance. Story 47. An office job where everything is urgent or an emergency. Unless you work in emergency medicine or a place where your job is to stop emergencies, this is not normal. Story 48. In my experience, speeches about how you are free to finish the day when you want but are equally expected to put in more time when you still have work to do are common. I have worked in several offices and have only heard this speech in places where everyone is overwhelmed with work, and I have never seen anyone leave early. Story 49. I should have picked up on this about IKEA, the feeling where it is like a cult of personality. It is less about individuality and more about the overall group or herd mentality. Walmart and some other businesses care about individual pursuits and the ability to use personal experience. Story 50. When senior leadership refers to decentralized online governance entities while discussing making efficiencies and being resilient after a significant layoff, while everyone is already spread thin. Story 51. I have worked for the same hotel chain for quite a while now. About 3 years ago, I transferred to a location closer to home. At my previous workplace, several managers had been working there for 10 or more years. In the new location, the longest-serving manager had 2 years of experience. I am now back at my original location. Story 52. I have considered someone offering you the job immediately after the interview to be a red flag. In my experience, it indicates a high turnover rate. The jobs I was applying for were not entry-level. Story 53. Recently, I had a new coworker who was a little too ambitious for our small company. She would be asked to solve a problem, and to do so, she would come up with a solution. She would then approach one of us to implement the changes she proposed individually. When we told her the solutions were bad or would take a long time, she would say, "Well, the owner said you need to do it." The owner would never say that. I have known him for nearly 2 decades, 16 of which I have been his employee. If something is a bad idea, he wants it properly explored. Another thing she did was show a complete lack of accountability. If we insisted that her solution was a bad idea, she would eventually say, "Don't look at me. It is the manager's idea." But if there was no pushback, obviously it was hers. The best example was when she told everyone we were going to take pictures of all employees for our website, despite my reminding her months earlier that consent is required for that. On top of not asking for consent, she also made many rules about what we could and could not wear and said we should bring a change of clothes. On the day itself, it turned out she had no plans for the pictures. She assumed someone else would decide what the pictures, which half of us did not want to be part of, would be about. Story 54. When they told me in the interview that the owner of the store was in the military, they said if you are 1 minute late, you will get written up. I went back to the same store under a different manager for an interview a few weeks later, and the manager wanted me to wait 30 minutes because he was running behind schedule on his interviews. Story 55. Us versus them mentality in management. There is already going to be some of that, but there has to be someone at the top who keeps it in check. Story 56. At the places I have worked, every disruptive, problematic, toxic individual refused to follow the scent-free policy and made no effort to comply. This is a great question to ask during a job interview. Story 57. Micromanaging whether I go to lunch at 11:59 or 12 o'clock because, according to him, it only takes 1 minute to walk down there. Okay. Story 58. A company where everyone is supposed to be nice to everyone in the name of culture. The problem is that to avoid confrontation, the politics become very toxic and people become highly passive-aggressive. They would rather let people get away with a lack of accountability than try to call them out and fix the problem. It is just a complete mess. Story 59. When the chief executive officer says, "It is not about what the team wants. It is about what I want." Or, rules for thee but not for me mentality. The manager expects you to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but they are frequently late or miss calls or meetings themselves. Story 60. The building or office seems run down. This is almost always a sign that while they are hiring, they are either undercapitalized and layoffs will happen soon, or they do not care about their employees at all. If you can help it, do not take a job from a major company that does not maintain its property. Story 61. Listen to how they talk about past coworkers, anyone who no longer works there. When I started working for Fidelity, it seemed strange that every person who had left the company had been described as dishonest. Every past employee was labeled a liar, accused of dishonestly concealing a job search, playing borderline illegal games because of greed, and leaving their coworkers short-staffed with no warning. They hated anyone who left the company voluntarily. The employees' faults became the main subject of discussion among managers and supervisors. A manager once called our team into a meeting to say they couldn't tell us why our supervisor had left, but implied his behavior had been inappropriate beyond belief. During the meeting, she insinuated he had stolen money, company secrets, and had inappropriate relationships with women in the office, suggesting we would be shocked by his actions. We already knew he had criticized our chief executive officer in a message to another employee, was immediately called to human resources and fired. The manager wanted us to think he was a criminal. We had a years-long freeze on raises and promotions in my division. It was only through this kind of blame that they retained any employees, by turning anyone who left into public enemy number 1 until the next person left. Story 62. Mean nurse behavior from coworkers past the age of 23. Ma'am, your second child is going off to college. Why are you acting like a sassy club girl? Story 63. Assuming that some of the women they work with have attitudes because they prioritize professionalism over friendliness, that person will think your work does not matter. Your contribution to anything they do will be considered irrelevant or an issue they have already handled. Story 64. Micromanagement disguised as being hands-on. Inability to adhere to a plan disguised as being agile. Story 65. When there is a large number of very experienced staff and a large number of very new staff, but no one in between. Story 66. If everyone is too busy or feels guilty for taking time off, that is not dedication. That is burnout culture in disguise. It is one of those sneaky signs that the place might not actually respect boundaries or work-life balance, even if they say they do. Sometimes it is just a crunch period, but if it is constant, that is a red flag waving at you. Story 67. Asked if you don't mind using your own vehicle to run an errand. Oh, so if I'm in an accident, my insurance company will not cover me? Sure. Story 68. When they ask any illegal questions at the interview, such as how old are you, do you have children, or do you go to church and where? Wait, you watch it? Story 69. New employees start in permanent part-time positions, while others who have been working for a couple of years remain casual. This happened to me and some others. A coworker confronted the supervisor, and soon after, we were offered permanent contracts. Story 70. The interview is either too easy for the skills required or they do not test your skills and take your word for it. You will end up working with colleagues who would have been filtered out if they were interviewed properly. Story 71. In hindsight, I should have been alerted by the fact that the average length of employment there was 2 weeks. However, I was young and desperate, so I took the job and then discovered the reason. Story 72. There is a reason they are always hiring. Also, the television show The Office is full of nonsense. Workplace pranksters are not even slightly funny, make everyone miserable, and in an industrial setting can even cause serious injury or death. Story 73. 1. If the manager appears to care too much about their looks, there is a risk of dealing with a narcissist. If the information technology infrastructure is too old, if the staff turnover rate is over 20% in office jobs, if onboarding is non-existent, if they talk about hard work and that money will flow later, if human resources acts as if they are somewhat valuable. Story 74. If the hiring process is marked by confusion, ambiguity, or poor communication, it is likely a sign that the company is not a place you should work. Story 75. Management treating themselves to meetings at nice restaurants, bars, and going on expensive group trips, while the company is suffering or employees are grossly underpaid is a red flag. This behavior may indicate that they are pocketing profits for themselves or stealing. Story 76. Requesting a pay stub from your previous employer to verify your last salary is irrelevant and primarily used to ensure you are paid as little as you are willing to accept. Story 77. No air conditioning or climate control in a machine shop, an attached warehouse where there is no welding or fabrication work in a hot and humid place like Houston, which is representative of the entire southern region. Story 78. Apologies for the inconvenience. It appears that the other person's name on the schedule was intended to be yours. Can you still come in? Story 79. 1. When no one is ever sure who is doing what. Companies where either people have been there forever or many people have only been there less than 2 years. Any company owned by private equity. Story 80. If the only challenges are dealing with the way the business is run or the people around you, you are not being intellectually challenged in a way that promotes growth. You are wasting daily energy at a job that may not be a good fit and can ultimately lead to burnout. Story 81. When senior management treats information about projects like currency, sharing details about the new marketing campaign with the entire marketing team will not spoil or ruin it. Knowing about the campaign can help us with other projects and prevent having to redo work after it launches. Story 82. I am always curious about the person who takes the last cup of coffee. Assuming no one is watching, do they leave a little bit in the pot or leave it empty, avoiding responsibility? Or do they rinse it out and so on? I would say that tells me a lot about someone. Story 83. In our Human Resources Handbook, Chief associates are supposed to work 1 hour more than associates. However, they always leave before us even though we arrive at the office before them. Story 84. These days, I ask about meeting frequency and the hiring manager's beliefs on it. Typically, great companies have infrequent and critically relevant meetings. Poor companies emphasize the importance of meetings for the team and hold more of them. Story 85. A red flag in the workplace that people frequently miss is a lack of psychological safety, where employees feel they cannot speak up, ask questions, or admit mistakes without fear of embarrassment or punishment. This can appear subtly, such as leaders shutting down ideas without discussion, people avoiding asking for help, team members always agreeing with management, even when decisions are questionable, mistakes being hidden instead of addressed constructively. Over time, this creates a toxic culture where innovation stalls, accountability decreases, and burnout increases. Because it is not always overt, many do not recognize it until the consequences surface. Story 86. The person who is always telling you about other coworkers' mistakes or drama is likely telling everyone about yours too. I had a coworker like this who seemed very friendly at first until I realized I was just her newest source of office gossip. Story 87. When the person training you says, "I just figure it out as I go for everything," it can be challenging. I started a job where my trainer had been there for 2 years but could not explain basic procedures. Story 88. Companies conduct employee surveys but do not make any changes based on the employee feedback. I have been in a couple of companies that conducted surveys, and in both, one of the top employee concerns was compensation. Both companies did nothing about it. One company said human resources would look into it, but compensation was never adjusted. The other company said employees need to be recognized in different ways, so they would send more thank you messages. Receiving emails thanking me will not change my situation. Surveys are often done so companies can announce that they listen to their employees. It is performative and a waste of time. Story 89. Overly religious coworkers who always want to talk to you about your relationship with Jesus and will not take no for an answer. Story 90. A workplace that truly emphasizes being a team player means doing the work that others avoid because they are unwilling to do it. Story 91. This one, workplace red flags, what to watch out for. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.